anything did you do as commissioners to see if the law is properly being implemented?
So I can start on this, sir. I mean, I think on given cases and even on the discussion, it makes all the sense in the world for you to come forward and ask us in a 6103 context, and that's the way we could aim.
I'm asking general policy. I'm not asking for a specific taxpayer.
And we can come back and let you know that there are examinations underway and the determination letter processes are underway.
Are there, have you focused on these larger organizations? I'm not asking to name any. I'm asking about policy.
There's no policy to aim one way or another on organizations. It's what comes through, and I can't really speak.
But it looks like this incidentally office was focusing on, it seems, smaller organizations that may or may not have been spending money to influence campaigns. I don't know. I don't know with the Inspector General. Let me ask the Inspector General about that. To what degree of the 298 or the 96 or remaining 202 were involved in political activities?
Senator, we will be engaging in a review of the IRS's handling oversight of this very issue as to whether or not these organizations have engaged in.
So you don't know?
I don't have it at the ready, sir, but we will have that for the record.
But have you been asking that question?
Yes. We are starting the audit, sir. So we have not yet posed the question.
So again, we ask, to what degree has IRS, exercise a little common sense here, say, holy mackerel, we got to look at some of these organizations in the wake of Citizens United and see if there should be a change. To what degree is IRS, did the IRS ask itself that question, either at the commissioner level, sub-commissioner, anywhere? And it doesn't take rocket science to know what's going on here. I'm not targeting conservative, I'm not targeting liberal. I just want to enforcing the law here. So why didn't somebody in the IRS, or did somebody in the IRS, think about this and try to do something about it?
So I think, sir, that we do have an exam program underway that we'd be glad to walk you through. We do have the determination letter process. You should not assume that all the cases in the determination process that we're talking about are of one.
Okay, let's go beyond the assumption. To what degree are there other cases that the IRS is looking at in addition to those we've identified in the TICTA report?
So I'd have to come back to you on that, sir. But we have
is there several, many?
I think that I don't know whether I don't have a sense, sir.
You don't have a sense?
I believe there's 50 to 100, but I could be absolutely wrong. So rather than throw a number out there, sir, let us come back.
Okay, Commissioner Schulman, what's your sense?
I haven't been at the IRS for 6 months.
No.
I don't know what's in the pipeline.
No, when you're commissioner, these got comfort letters when you were on your watch.
I mean, my sense is very similar to Mr. Miller's, that there's an examination program underway, that there's, or at least, was underway, that groups were being looked at and these cases were being worked.
Did it come to your mind that perhaps some of these organizations perhaps were abusing the spirit of 501c4?
I think it would have been.
In the wake of Citizens United, with all the money that's being spent.
It came to my mind that career professionals should be the ones touching these cases, thinking about, are they using the tax exempt laws properly, and that a presidential appointee should not be touching a case.
That's interesting. So you should have no view about that subject, nor should you give no direction to the agency.
And then you asked this one first.
Is that correct?
That's not how I'd state it. What I said is I did not want to touch any individual cases or give direction on individual cases.
I'm not saying that. You're misinterpreting my question. I'm asking, as a policy, were you aware that perhaps in the wake of Citizens United that the exemption was being abused? Let me ask that simple question.
I was aware that in the news and in letters that we got, there were a lot of people concerned about things in multiple different ways with views.
All right, you're aware of all these in multiple different.
And I was aware that our tax-exempt government entities group was also aware of the need to take a look at 501c4 organizations and to have a number of exams underway. And my understanding, which is 6 months old, with the caveat at the time, is that there were a number of exams underway.
Where does the buck stop in the IRS?
What's that?
Where does the buck stop at the IRS?
I mean,
Where?
I think I've said clearly that all of this happened on my watch.
You've said that, but you're dodging the question whether you did anything about the obvious flow of money going in the wake of that Supreme Court decision to 501c4s. You're basically, sorry, go ahead.
What's that?
Go ahead.
I mean, I think I've told you what I have to say about it. I think IRS is given a very difficult task. My understanding was people are on the job working on that task. And I, as a matter of practice and policy, did not reach down into the tax-exempt government entities world to affect the cases.
That's not the question I'm asking. You're answering a different question. The question I'm asking is not whether you affect specific cases, but whether you, let me ask a different question. I know my time's up. Are you aware of the Supreme Court decision, says United?
Yes, I'm aware.
You're aware of it. And you're aware of its holding, what it held? Are you aware of what?
In a general sense, I am.
And what was that? What's your understanding?
My best understanding is that corporations and other entities can give money to political organizations.
And are you aware?
But I'm not an expert in.
Are you aware
law.
that suddenly 501c4s were getting a lot of donations and spent a lot of money?
I'm definitely aware that there was a influx of 501c4 applications into the IRS.
Did it occur to you that perhaps in the wake of the decision that statute is being abused? That is, the statute not being used exclusively for non-political purposes?
I mean, Senator, my belief is that Congress has given the IRS a very difficult task, and I understand that you have a desire that we would have done more.
You're making a different statement, not responsive to my question. My question again is, to what degree were you aware of the difficulties caused by the statute and the Supreme Court decision? And second, to what degree did you do anything about it? That is, try to make sure that the statute's not abused.
I was aware from a variety of sources, whether it's the media, letters, etc., discussions with Mr. Miller and other people on our team, and I was aware that the appropriate people were making sure that the exam plan was working on this issue.
Okay, so I'm not going to split hairs here, but that's, frankly, an unresponsive answer. Senator Hatch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say that there are plenty of 501c4s across the political spectrum. And some of the 501c4s that were really sponsored by Democrats are extremely wealthy, too. I mean, it isn't just one side or the other. It seems to me we ought to be very careful. And then, frankly, this targeting began before the so-called spike in 501c4s. And by the way, it was a bigger spike in 501c5s, which involved the unions. Some of my friends are advocating for a Disclose Act, but they always exclude the 501c5s, the unions. In other words, disclose your donor lists, but not, what's done on the other side. If you're going to do something in this area, and I agree, it's Congress's obligation to do it. We ought to do it the right way. So, you can pick on Crossroads all you want, but there were plenty of liberal groups on the other side.
To be clear, I know you don't understand. My view of this whole subject is
I'm not picking on you.
Yeah, it's both sides here, not just one side.
It is both sides.
It is both sides, right?
Yeah, but some have indicated it's just one because they hate Crossroads because it was exceptionally effective in many, many ways. I can understand that. Now, let me just say there, for those calling for a ban on 501c4 political activity, I think it's beyond hypocritical not to call for a ban on 501c5 labor groups' political activity as well. But we know that's never going to happen around here, unless there's a sea change in the Congress of the United States. Now, Commissioner Shulman, Mr. Shulman What was the date that you first learned from any source that the IRS exempt organizations determinations unit in Cincinnati was using a be on the lookout, or BOLO, listing for terms such as the Tea Party?
To the best of my recollection, it was sometime in the spring of 2012.
Okay, right during the election year, right?
It was the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration was planning to look into it. My policy, procedure, practice at that time while I was at the IRS is if I hear something that is a concern and I don't know how big a concern, how significant it is, all the details, if I get some of the facts but not all of the facts, as long the proper place for it to be is in the Inspector General's hand to track down all the facts, and then once all the facts are known, that will be reported to Congress, to the Commissioner, to the Treasury, to all the appropriate
But you knew
parties.
this was going on, and you had represented that it was not going on, and then you found out that it was going on, and you never came to us and let us know what was going on.
I certainly don't believe, and I don't have any memory of representing that that the BOLO list was not going on at a time that I knew it was going on.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put these 4 letters, the 2 letters from my colleagues and myself, and the responses from Mr. Miller into the record at this point.
Objection.
Now, Mr. Miller, to your knowledge, the first date that anyone at the Treasury Department source learned about any Tea Party groups that applied for tax-exempt status being subjected to extra scrutiny. What was your first date when you heard about it?
I don't believe I had any conversations or any knowledge in advance of my taking
In a non-political, non-partisan manner. And to have the Commissioner not be the one commenting, who's the only presidential appointee besides the Chief Counsel, not be the one having correspondence with Congress did not seemed like a good idea, because these issues are highly charged and political.
Thank you very much. Senator Crapo. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't here. Oh, Senator Nelson's next, sorry.
Of carrying out the law. And when it becomes patently obvious that the law is being thwarted because the IRS ability not to tax is being used by organizations to election, then it seems to this senator that the obligation of the leader of the organization, political appointee or not, it is the obligation of that leader to step up and take responsibility that the law is not being obeyed. And whereas Senator Hatch has pointed out from his standpoint that this was government run amok, it also seems to me that this was government that was impotent and that did not act. Mr. General Inspector, should we be concerned that groups are undermining the intent of the law and gaining tax-exempt status, even though electioneering is their purpose?
We should be concerned if any organization is not adhering to the law as it has been passed by Congress and enacted by the President. There's no question about that.
Well, the law as it's written is written. So any attempt to come back and say that we have to change or clarify the law seems to me to be the wrong question. The question is the administrative implementation of the existing law when there are such obvious abuses.
Senator, excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Senator, one of our recommendations issued in this report is that the IRS seek clarification from the Department of Treasury and in turn the Department of the Treasury the clarification from Congress on this very issue.
Why do you need clarification from Congress? The law is very clear. It says you can't involve yourself in electioneering if you want this kind of tax-exempt status. I don't understand. Why isn't that just, again, passing the buck? Isn't this a matter of administrative implementation of existing law?
As you and others have indicated here, the way the law has been interpreted by the IRS over the course of a number of decades, I don't, in all candor, don't know whether that was done as a result of court decisions or just simply internal policies, but further explanation is needed in this area, sir.
As a matter of fact, now here's an exact example of how things get all contorted from the original legislative intent. The law was passed, along comes a reg. The reg says exactly what the law says, which is you can't be engaging in election activities. And then along comes a 1981 analysis of the reg, and it says, under the present law, certain exempt organizations, C4s, may engage in political campaign activities. That, on its face, is exactly the opposite of what the law says. So again, this is an administrative implementation and interpretation. But that's 1981. We really didn't have a problem on this until what we saw in the last year or two. And with it becoming so patently and obvious in 2011 and 2012 what was happening under the name of C4s for some public purpose. So I would hope that the administration would take some responsibility, if that's the insurance, the IRS commissioner, if that's the Secretary of the Treasury, if indeed that's the president, that we'd see some implementation of the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Roberts, you're next.
It's not good for the country. Mr. Schuman, you said you're not personally responsible, but then I think you've sort of backed off of that to some degree. But could you just sort of come along with Mr. Miller and say, yes, I was responsible?
Senator,
It's easy, 3 words, I was responsible.
I understand the words. What I'm telling you is this happened on my watch, and I accept that.
But you're not personally responsible.
I'm deeply regretful that this happened, and it happened.
Okay, never mind. Let's just move on. I am interested in all this business of the law and what is the law. The statute came in 1913 with Woodrow Wilson and William B. McAdoo, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we can get him to come before the committee. And 1959 under Dwight David Eisenhower with Robert Anderson as secretary. That is the difference between exclusively and then not primarily. Then we had the change that Senator from Florida was talking about. And then in 1998, if I can find my notes here, we had, maybe this is one of the great strides that you made, sir, but we had the IRS Restructuring Act. And that really refers to the 10 deadly sins, Mr. George, that you were talking about. I was going to ask you who Moses was on the 10 deadly sins to figure out, who can be the judge in this, and it turns out it is the IRS commissioner, so it was Mr. Shulman. I've got them right here. I'm not going to read them, but sin number 1, well, I'll read 3, maybe 4. Sin number 1 was to violate proper procedures to seize taxpayer assets. That perhaps happened. 6, no retaliation, harassing of a taxpayer. That's it. That's 1. Now, these are civil penalties, by the way. 7, a willful violation of taxpayer privacy. And that, of course, happened. I would put number 11 down here with a bolo. I don't know what on earth we're doing with bolos. That's a law enforcement issue, and that really offends me. But my question is, to former Director Schulman, did you ever activate these? Did you ever hold anybody accountable to the Ted Denley sins?
So there's actually a procedure in place at the IRS. It was there when I got there that I think was put in immediately after that law, or sometime after that law was passed. That the only thing, most people were actually held accountable before they ever got to the commissioner's level. So one of these things is violated. I think so.
Well, I'm not talking about you. I'm just, I'm not saying that you violated these. I just wondered if you ever did take action on a civil action against anybody that violated the 10 deadly sins, ever.
I believe so, that on my watch, people were dismissed, fired, disciplined around the 10 deadly
Mr. George, is that your experience? Or?
That is our understanding, sir.
Okay, and then you said this was being bumped up to an executive position. What executive, or to the executive? What do we mean by that in terms of the 10 deadly sins and going over them and whether this is appropriate or not, and for that matter, also the statute and the regs? On the 501, you said it was being bumped up to an executive level. What?
Oh,
who? What?
No. Well, I wanted to clarify that we would engage in a continued review of this matter,
right,
to determine if there were any violations of the 10 deadly sins, for lack of a...
What would you agree that number 1, 6, and 7, as I have stated them, would be certainly applicable in these cases?
They, and if I may, sir, and please, I'm going to quote it directly from the report. It is a violation of Restructuring and Reform Act 98, Section 1203B3,
right,
for IRS employees to falsify or destroy documents to conceal mistakes made by any employee with respect to a matter involving a taxpayer or a taxpayer representative, and a violation of RA 98, Section 1203B6, for IRS employees to violate the Internal Revenue Code, Treasury regulations, or policies of the IRS for purposes of retaliating against or harassing a taxpayer.
What's the status of that with regards to this whole episode?
We are still in the process of reviewing this.
I see.
I don't have an
Okay.
answer for that.
I had just one quick question here. It's sort of a mea culpa. The last 25 years, we've asked the IRS to move beyond its core functions, Mr. Chairman, tax administration enforcement, to oversee all matters of other functions. We are responsible for that. All of these laudable programs have support from the Congress. But I think we are at a tipping point with regards to this whole episode, and that, well, maybe the Affordable Health Care Act. I'd like to ask all three gentlemen, how confident are you that the IRS has the proper oversight and the management structures to implement the Affordable Care Act in a manner that will give confidence to the taxpayers they are being treated in the fairest manner possible, that their personal health information is safeguarded, and that they will not be penalized if they happen to hold views that are not in the mainstream or otherwise unpopular? Where are we?
If I may start, Senator, the RRA...
Very briefly. Very briefly.
Certainly, sir. The ACA requires a number of changes in the tax code. The IRS, we've issued 2 audits that have indicated that thus far the IRS is making progress in instituting changes in their software and in other procedures to effectuate that law.
So you're saying you're confident or not?
As of this stage, we have found no major problems in this area.
Senator, sorry.
Mr. Miller, could you respond?
Very briefly, because you're already...
It's a yes or no question. How confident are you? Confident or are you not confident?
I'm confident.
Good. Next question.
When I left in November, I was confident that the IRS...
Thank you, Senator.
That's not a train wreck, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. George,
Yes, Senator.
in your investigation, in your audit, what is the difference between an audit and an investigation?
Again,
It's been interchangeable throughout this hearing.
sir, to be precise, under the Inspector General Act, we at TICTR are given the authority to conduct both audits and investigations in the oversight of our IRS programs and operations. Audits are reviews of IRS programs to identify systemic problems and recommend corrective actions. Investigations are focused on persons or persons whose actions were undertaken in response to reports that we've, or complaints that we've received or misconduct that they engaged in.
So this audit could lead to an investigation?
Yes, it could.
Okay. Now, your audit didn't look at leaked documents to ProPublica, and it didn't look at leaked tax returns filed by the National Organization for Marriage, and it didn't look at whether personnel within the EO forwarded individual donor lists to other divisions for audits. Am I correct?
Senator, the Internal Revenue Code has strict confidentiality provisions within it, and I am not in a position to either confirm or deny anything as it relates to that.
Could we conclude that if you didn't look at the items or more that I just mentioned, that would be sort of the liberal groups, that one can't conclude then that there was not political motivation in this targeting?
Senator, I'm not in a position to respond to that question,
Okay.
sir.
Mr. Miller, you stated that you thought the motivation was that the employees wanted to get greater efficiency. Am I remembering that correctly?
I think that's right, sir.
Did you mean that the use of keywords to determine which applications would be flagged for scrutiny and deep review to speed up the process?
I think what, excuse me, the situation was, and I think it's outlined well in the report, that in 2010 we began to see some cases. Someone asked that someone take a look and see whether there are other cases of a similar type. Decision was made at that level to centralize cases. Question then became how to centralize, and that's when it moved from email traffic to...
How would you explain the fact that none of the keywords applied to any liberal groups or liberal applications?
We'd have to talk to the folks that did that.
Would you be suspect that there was something political about the fact that only keywords that applied to conservative organizations would have been flagged?
I would agree that the perception is there. I would also say that once we took a look, our folks didn't find that necessarily to be the case.
When you looked your folks, you did an investigation?
We did less than an investigation. I had sent, I think...
Did you ask the Inspector General to look into this?
I don't know whether I asked them, but I knew they were in already looking at this.
Mr. Schliemann, you stated that you were briefed by Mr. Miller. Am I correct?
Yes.
What did you do with the information that Mr. Miller shared with you about the audit? Nothing?
So I was briefed, and
Did you ask him any questions?
at the time of the briefing, to the best of my memory, I learned three things. I learned there was a list. I learned that TIGDA was planning an investigation, and I learned that the activities
TIGDA was planning an investigation?
I'm sorry, and that TIGDA was aware of it, had actually been to Cincinnati, if my memory serves me right, and was in the process of opening an audit.
You didn't ever ask Mr. Miller what the purpose of the investigation was?
Well, I think it was obvious to me when I heard it that something didn't sound right about having a list.
But you've testified you had no idea that this had anything to do with the practices that were going on in the EO in Cincinnati, didn't you?
I testified, or I said earlier, that when I learned about it, I knew there was a list. I knew the word Tea Party was on the list, to the best of my recollection.
So what'd you do?
I don't know if, I didn't know at that time what else was on the list.
What'd you do with the information you had?
What did I
What'd you do with it? You were the head of the IRS. What did you do with it?
I think this was brought to the head of the IRS, again, with three facts. There's a list, that TIGDA is aware of it. And
But you took no action. You didn't ask Mr.
And
Miller to...
Mr. Miller, the best of my memory, told me at that time that it had been stopped and TIGDA was looking into it. And so there were, so for me,
You have knowledge of the BOLO list at this time?
what's that?
You had knowledge of the existence of the BOLO list at this time?
Well, it was brought to me at this time.
It was brought to you at that time. That was the first time you knew about it, was when Mr. Miller brought it to you?
That is my, memory. I've been out for a long time, but I'm, put it this way, I believe it is, and I certainly don't remember ever hearing about it before.
Mr. Miller, was that the first time you discussed with the then commissioner about a BOLO list?
I believe so.
Did you have any additional follow-up conversations about the scope of the audit?
So the scope of the audit would have been the Inspector General coming to us and discussing that.
What action did you take as the deputy? Would you supply that for the record, and could I ask you to give us your best information about how many times that individual was briefed
We will do our level.
on the audit?
We'll endeavor to do so, Senator.
And Mr. Schulman, I think you told me earlier, but I'll give you one more chance at it. You told me you had no conversations with Chief Counsel about what went on in the EO and their practices.
I remember having conversations with Chief Counsel about general policy matters, not the kinds of matters we're talking about, inappropriate criteria, a BOLO list, about this broader conversation the committee's been
An
having.
Inspector General's audit.
No, about the broader, around the broader conversations of, C4s, and should there be guidance? Because the Chief Counsel, the Assistant Secretary, and the Commissioner get involved in the guidance plan. I don't have memory of talking to the Chief Counsel.
Thank you, Senator.
About,
Thank you, Senator, very much. Thank you.
about the audit.
Okay, Senator Portman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the second round and a chance to follow up on some of our earlier questions. Just to go back to where we were when I had to move on, we were talking about the fact that we sent a letter, Senator Hatch and myself, other members joined us on March 14th. That letter was in response to, again, a lot of information we were getting from groups back home saying that they were being inappropriately asked questions that were irrelevant to what they thought should be relevant questions about their status, and that there were delays and that there were very short time frames for producing significant amounts of information. So we wrote the letter laying out these issues and in essence asking you guys whether you were targeting groups politically. That was March 14th. And then on March 26th, March 23rd, based on your testimony, Mr. Miller, you say that having received our letter and knowing additional information from the media, I assume, you asked Nancy Marks, who was your senior technical advisor for tax-exempt organizations, to go down and see what was going on and report back to you. You testified earlier that for 6 weeks, you don't recall having asked her what she learned, and therefore you responded to our letter by saying everything's fine. And you responded to our letter on April 26th. So March 14th, we asked you these questions. And again, this is not about the members of this committee. I was not actually on the committee at the time. This is about the American people getting the information that was needed to be able to correct the situation. You now tell us today that you received a briefing 1 week after you sent us a letter. Now remember, your letter says everything's fine, no targeting. And we can believe or not believe the fact that during that 5-week period you didn't bother to find out what they were finding out down in Cincinnati. But a week after you send a letter back to us, you do get a briefing. This is the May 3rd briefing. You have testified that you were outraged when you got that briefing on the 3rd of May, so a week after you responded to us. Is that correct, that you were outraged by what you heard?
I was troubled, sir.
Okay, you used the word outrage in testimony last week. If you were so outraged, it seems to me very odd that you didn't try to correct the record, because you had told us in the letter back that everything was fine. If you knew on April 26th, when you responded to us with that letter, what you learned on May 3rd, that political criteria like Tea Party, Patriot, We the People was used Would you have told us that in the letter that you sent to us on April 22nd?
I don't remember the letter clearly enough, sir. I mean, your
Well, no,
organization of...
this is the letter that you sent back to us based on our March 14th letter.
Yes, sir.
You don't know about that letter?
I do know about the letter. I don't-
Okay. My question
I
to
know
you
about the
is,
letter.
if you...
No, I did not know of the list on the 26th. I will tell you that my recollection of the letter was it was about the donor letters that were going on, which was a separate and distinct aspect.
Our letter asked specifically for the assurance that these suspicious inquiries were unrelated to, quote, politics, that they were consistent with the IRS's treatment of tax-exempt organizations across the spectrum. That's a quote. It asked specifically what criteria and what, quote, basis there were for applying greater scrutiny and requesting follow-up information for 501c4 applicants, and you responded with a 10-page letter. And
To this day, sir, I don't believe there was political motivation, as I've explained.
okay. My question is, you responded with a 10-page letter saying it was neutral. There were only individualized, legitimate criteria used, not based on politics. There's no question that your letter was inaccurate. And you learned on May 3rd that it was false. And yet you did nothing to correct the public record, even though you were outraged based on your own testimony by your May 3rd briefing. So look, I think these are serious questions for us to ask, and I think, you know, we deserve answers, not for us again, but for the American people and those who were subject to this inappropriate targeting. Mr. George, let me ask you a question about the audit. First, you have said that there's a difference between an audit and an investigation.
Correct.
Can you just briefly tell us what the difference is in terms of how deep you go? In other words, did you use your full investigative powers to uncover wrongdoing? Did you use your broader subpoena powers, for instance, on the audit?
We did not thus far in the production of this audit that we're discussing today, Senator, but there is no question that as a result of some of the findings that we have uncovered, subsequent action will be taken by us.
So on page 7 of your report, you state that Mr. Miller and subordinate employees, quote, stated that the inappropriate criteria was not influenced by any individual or organization outside of the IRS. That's on page 7 of your report. And that's been used by the administration to say that there was no influence. Let me be clear. Is that a finding of your report, or is that simply a restatement of what IRS employees told you?
It is a restatement of the information that we received from IRS employees, okay, Senator.
And that would be consistent with an audit as compared to an investigation?
That is correct, sir.
So given that this is only an audit, I take it you didn't ask anyone in the administration outside of the IRS if they ever weighed in with the IRS on the issue of monitoring and approval of 501c4 organizations?
That is correct, sir.
So you haven't even asked the question of anybody outside?
Not at this stage, sir.
And I take it you didn't subpoena or review any relevant emails, call logs, schedules, notes from meetings to verify that these statements from the IRS employees were accurate and complete, because that's beyond the scope of an audit. Is that correct?
Actually, though, Senator, we did review quite a few emails in the course of this.
Do you feel like it was all of the emails involved with this, call logs, schedules, notes, and so on?
It would
verify those statements?
Of the people that we interviewed and of people at the level that we thought would be directly involved at that stage.
Is it beyond the scope of an audit to ask people outside of the IRS whether they influenced the IRS on monitoring approval of 501c4s?
An audit is on a case-by-case basis, Senator, so in this instance, again, we did not have indications due to the interviews that we conducted that there was any reason to go beyond that. That was at the time that this audit was being produced, which was over the course of a year. Again, events subsequent to this have now caused us to reassess how and what we're going to look at.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the bottom line is that there is a need for a fuller investigation as you and Senator Hatch are undertaking. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Senator. Thank you very much, all of you, for your testimony here today. There are obviously many more questions not yet answered, and the committee will continue to look into this matter. But thank you very much. Hearing's adjourned.